The Cathari research vessel Axis 7 hung in Earth's orbit like a crystalline spider, its translucent hull refracting sunlight in impossible patterns. Chief researcher Venra stood before the observation window, her iridescent scales shifting colors as she contemplated the blue planet below. After 6 standard cycles of preparation, they were ready to begin their comprehensive study of Earth's dominant species. Status report on the test subjects, she commanded, her inner eyelids flickering with anticipation. Research assistant Telmin consulted his neural interface. The 3 human volunteers have cleared quarantine protocols. Their vital signs are interesting, Chief. Even in their resting state, their biological readings don't conform to any known baseline. Venra turned away from the window, her attention caught. Elaborate. Their cellular structure is in a constant state of flux. We've never seen anything like it. Their bodies seem to be continuously adapting to their environment, even under controlled conditions. The research chamber housed 3 humans. Dr. Maya Chen, a physicist, former Marine James Cooper, and Sarah Reeves, an extreme sports athlete. They had volunteered for the alien research program, though the Cathari couldn't fathom why any species would willingly submit themselves to unknown scientific procedures. The humans sat in the chamber, seemingly at ease despite being surrounded by technology centuries beyond their understanding. Cooper was actually dozing, while Chen read something on a tablet, and Reeves was doing what she called stretching exercises. Begin preliminary testing, Venray ordered. Start with basic environmental stress factors. The chamber's temperature began to drop. According to their research, humans required a narrow band of environmental conditions to survive. Yet, as the temperature fell well below what should have been comfortable, the subjects showed only minor signs of discomfort. Their bodies are actively generating heat, Telmin reported, his voice carrying the note of disbelief. They're burning stored energy to maintain their core temperature, but the efficiency is impossible. They should be consuming far more energy for this level of thermal regulation. Chen had put down her tablet and was now doing jumping jacks. Getting a bit chilly in here, she commented casually. Mind if we move around to stay warm? Cooper cracked open an eye. Reminds me of that winter training exercise in Alaska. Though that was worse, we had to dig snow caves to survive. Venray's scales shifted to a deep purple of confusion. You voluntarily expose yourselves to lethal conditions. For training. How else would we learn to handle it? Cooper shrugged, finally standing to join Chen in her exercises. Better to practice when it's safe than be caught unprepared when it matters. The Cathari scientists exchanged troubled looks. This casual approach to potentially lethal situations didn't align with any known survival patterns. They switched to heat stress testing. The chamber temperature rose rapidly, well beyond what their research suggested humans could comfortably tolerate. The subjects began to sweat, an efficient cooling mechanism that the Cathari had initially mistaken for a sign of biological breakdown. Their bodies are actively adapting to prevent heat stroke, Telmin observed. They're redirecting blood flow, increasing surface cooling, and their cellular structure is strengthening. This doesn't make sense, Chief. They're becoming more resistant to the heat as we watch. Reeves had stripped down to her basic clothing and was still doing her stretches. You know what this reminds me of? Hot yoga. Though the humidity's not quite right. You deliberately exercise in high-temperature conditions. Venray asked, unable to keep the incredulity from her voice. Sure, great for flexibility and mental discipline, Reeves replied cheerfully. Plus, it makes regular conditions feel easy in comparison. The Cathari research team spent the next several hours running increasingly complex tests, and with each new revelation, their concern grew. The humans showed extraordinary adaptation to pressure changes, unusual resistance to radiation, and most troublingly, an ability to improve their performance through what they called practice. Chief, Telmin finally said, his scales now a pale yellow of worry. I've completed the preliminary analysis. Their bodies don't just adapt to survive. They adapt to thrive. Every stress we introduce becomes a source of strengthening. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for improvement. This goes beyond normal evolutionary patterns. Venera studied the humans through the observation window. They were now engaged in what they called sharing stories about various survival situations they'd encountered, each seemingly more extreme than the last, and laughing about them. Update their species classification, she ordered quietly. Mark humans as a level 1 biological anomaly. And tell Min, encrypt these findings. If word gets out about a species that actually grows stronger from adversity, it could cause panic in the galactic community. In the chamber, the humans continued their conversation, unaware that they had just been classified as one of the most dangerous species ever encountered, not for their technology, not for their weapons, but for their body's simple, terrifying ability to turn every challenge into an advantage. 2 cycles into the research project, and Venera's private laboratory had become a chaos of holographic displays. Each screen showed a different aspect of human biology, and none of them made sense. She had barely slept since the initial findings, driven by equal parts fascination and horror. Display the cellular regeneration comparison, she ordered. The central hologram shifted to show human tissue repair alongside standard healing patterns from across the galaxy. The difference was stark and disturbing. Teltman entered the lab, his scales a muted green of concern. Chief, you need to see the latest psychological data. What have they done now? They're deliberately injuring themselves. Small amounts, but still. They call it building calluses. Venera's inner eyelids flickered rapidly. Explain. Dr. Chen noticed that some of our tests involved pressure on their skin. She and Cooper have begun a systematic program of applying controlled damage to their hands to toughen them. They say it's standard training procedure. The concept was so alien that Venera had to take a moment to process it. They intentionally damage their bodies to make them stronger. Yes, and it's working. Their cellular response is actually anticipating the damage now. The affected areas are becoming more resilient before we even begin our tests. The main display shifted to show real-time footage of the human chamber. Reeves was teaching Chen and Cooper something she called breath control exercises for underwater situations. The humans had requested a water tank for what they termed practice, though no tests involving liquid immersion had been scheduled. Their lung capacity has increased by 12% since they began these exercises, Tel Min reported. They're literally rewriting their body's limitations through sheer will. Venera moved to another display, this one showing neural activity patterns. Look at this. When we expose them to a new stress factor, their brains don't just process it as a threat. They analyze it. They look for ways to use it. Chief, there's something else. Tel Min's scales shifted to the deep blue of professional concern. We've detected signs of what appears to be deliberate genetic modification in their history. Artificial enhancement. No, natural selection, but at an accelerated rate. They've adapted to survive in every climate on their planet. Desert, tundra, mountains, seas. They'd found ways to live in conditions that should be lethal. And they did it without technology, without genetic engineering. They just decided to live there and forced their bodies to comply. The implications were staggering. A species that could self-modify through sheer determination was unprecedented. It violated every known principle of evolutionary biology. In the chamber, Cooper was now demonstrating something he called pressure points to his fellow subjects. If you're ever in a tight spot, he was saying, knowing how your body works can be the difference between life and death. Speaking of tight spots, Chen added, have you analyzed our skeletal structure yet? Humans can survive some pretty intense impacts if we're prepared for them. Tel Min checked the data. They're correct, Chief. Their bones don't just break. They'd microfracture and heal stronger. Every injury that doesn't kill them literally makes them more durable. Venera watched as Reeves demonstrated what she called a parkour roll, a technique for turning potentially lethal falls into controlled movement. The casual way they discussed survival mechanisms was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. We need to expand the scope of our investigation, Venray decided. I want to understand their limits, if they even have any. Prepare the enhanced testing protocols. Chief, are you sure? The Galactic Science Council might object to. The Council doesn't understand what we're dealing with here. Venray's scales had taken on the deep crimson of scientific determination. These humans, they're not just another species. They're an evolutionary anomaly. Every natural law says they shouldn't exist, yet here they are, casually defying biological constraints, as if they were mere suggestions. In the chamber, the humans had moved on to discussing something they called cross-training. Apparently, they weren't content to master just one type of physical adaptation. They wanted to be adaptable in every possible way. How do they not see how extraordinary this is? Tel Min wondered aloud. Because to them, it's normal, Venra realized. They've never known anything different. They don't realize that their very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about life itself. She turned back to her displays, adding another layer of security encryption to their findings. The more they learned about humans, the more certain she became that this information had to be contained. The galaxy wasn't ready to know that there was a species out there that treated biological impossibilities as daily challenges to overcome. Little did she know, the humans were about to demonstrate abilities that would make their physical adaptability seem tame in comparison. The emergency alert pierced through the research vessel's quiet hum. Venra burst into the observation center, her scales flickering between alarm red and confusion purple. The scene before her made her inner eyelids snap shut in shock. The testing chamber's environmental controls were failing, but that wasn't what had triggered the alert. It was the humans' response that had sent the monitoring systems into overdrive. Report, she demanded. Tel Min's scales had gone completely white. We were running the isolation tests, separating them into individual chambers, introducing environmental stressors. Everything was within calculated safety parameters. But then, on the monitors, Cooper was systematically dismantling the partition between his chamber and Chen's, using nothing but his bare hands and what appeared to be a broken piece of monitoring equipment. The materials were supposed to be unbreakable. How is he doing that? Venra demanded. Those barriers are rated 4. That's not the concerning part, Tel Min interrupted, his voice shaking. Look at their neural patterns. The brain activity displays showed something impossible. All 3 humans, despite being in separate chambers, were showing synchronized neural responses. They were somehow coordinating without any form of communication. They're displaying pack behavior, Tel Min explained. But it's more than that. Their stress responses aren't just individual anymore. They're reinforcing each other. The very isolation meant to test their limits is making them stronger. In the second chamber, Chen had repurposed the environmental monitoring system into what appeared to be a crude but effective communication device. She wasn't just working around their technology. She was using it in ways its designers had never imagined possible. Reeves, in the third chamber, had entered what the humans called a meditative state, but her biological readings were off the charts. She was somehow regulating her body's functions at a cellular level, adapting to the increasingly hostile environment through sheer force of will. Shut it down, Venray ordered. End the experiment now. We can't. Tel Min's scales rippled with distress. The system isn't responding. The environmental controls are locked in a feedback loop. Cooper had broken through the first partition. The moment he entered Chen's chamber, both of their biological readings surged. Their already extraordinary adaptation capabilities seemed to multiply in each other's presence. This is impossible, Venra whispered. No species can just decide to override their biological limitations. Humans can, Tel Min replied. And Chief, I don't think these are even their real limits. Look at their expressions. On the screens, all 3 humans wore what the research team had learned to recognize as grins, expressions that could indicate anything from joy to determination to outright challenge. They weren't afraid. They weren't even stressed. They were treating this life-threatening situation as some sort of impromptu training exercise. "You know what this reminds me of?" Cooper called out as he helped Chen modify her makeshift communication device. "That time in the Rockies when the avalanche hit the climbing team." "Or that cave diving incident off the coast of Mexico," Chen replied, her fingers flying over the repurposed equipment. "Similar principles. Work with what you have, stay calm, trust your team." Reeves had begun what appeared to be a series of controlled hyperventilation exercises. "Longest I've ever held my breath was 6 minutes, she announced. "Bet I can push it to 7 if I have to." The HFY scientists watched in horrified fascination as the humans not only adapted to the deteriorating conditions, but began to treat them as a challenge to overcome. They weren't just surviving. They were using the situation to improve their capabilities. "Chief," Tell Min's voice had dropped to a whisper, "I think we need to consider the possibility that we've fundamentally misunderstood what we're dealing with here. These aren't just test subjects anymore. They're teaching themselves," Venra finished. "Every obstacle we put in their way, every limitation we try to impose, they're not just overcoming them. They're learning from them, adding them to their repertoire." The monitor showed Cooper and Chen had now reached Reeves' chamber. The combined biological readings from all three humans had synchronized into something the sensors couldn't even properly quantify. Their neural patterns were shifting faster than the system could analyze, adapting and evolving in real time. "New classification," Venra announced, her scales settling into the deep black of absolute certainty. "Mark humanity as the first and only known species with exponential adaptation capabilities. And tell Min, prepare the containment protocols. We can't risk the galaxy learning that such a species exists. Not yet." But as she watched the humans working together, turning a potential disaster into what they casually termed a learning experience, Venra had a sinking feeling that containing humanity might prove to be impossible. After all, how do you contain a species that treats containment itself as just another puzzle to solve? The Axis 7's primary reactor had never failed before. It wasn't supposed to be possible. Yet, as emergency sirens blared throughout the station, Venra faced the horrifying reality that their perfect containment system was about to become a perfect death trap. "Status report," she demanded, bursting onto the bridge. The normal crystalline shimmer of the command center was tainted by the red glow of emergency lighting. "Multiple cascading failures," Tellman reported, his scales cycling through patterns of panic. "The reactor's containment field is degrading. We have less than 1 planetary rotation before critical failure. Evacuation protocols. The emergency systems are locked down. Something in the reactor's radiation is interfering with our neural interfaces. We can't even access basic ship functions without them." Venra's scales went ash-gray. The HFY's technological superiority had become their greatest weakness. Their systems were so integrated, so dependent on their natural neural capabilities, that they had no manual overrides. "The humans," Tellman suddenly said. "They're requesting access to our engineering systems." "What? Why would they?" "Because we can help," Cooper's voice came through the comm system. "Somehow, they'd already figured out how to operate it. We've got experience with radiation-hardened environments and manual overrides." "Impossible," Venra replied. "Our systems require neural interface capability that your species doesn't possess." "Maybe," Chen's voice cut in, "but we've been studying your technology since we got here. The principles aren't that different from what we use, just more advanced. The real question is, do you want to maintain protocol, or do you want to survive?" Venra's scales shifted through a dozen colors before settling on the deep blue of decision. "Release them from the research chamber. Full access granted." What followed was unlike anything the HFY had ever witnessed. The humans didn't just help, they transformed the entire crisis response. Cooper immediately began organizing the HFY crew into teams, showing them how to manually override systems that they'd never even considered could be operated without neural interfaces. Your bodies are more radiation resistant than ours, he explained while demonstrating how to physically disconnect power couplings. But you never learned to work without your technology because you never had to. Sometimes limitations breed innovation. Meanwhile, Chen had commandeered the engineering bay, her fingers flying over control surfaces as she jury-rigged connections between incompatible systems. Your neural interfaces are amazing, she called out while splicing alien circuitry, but they're also a single point of failure. Humans learned early on to never rely on just one system. Reeves had taken charge of evacuation preparations, teaching the Ketheri crew emergency protocols that humans had developed over centuries of space exploration. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong, she explained while showing them how to create makeshift pressure seals. So you plan for everything to go wrong at once. This is impossible, Tel Min whispered to Venre as they watched the humans work. They're using our own technology in ways we never imagined, adapting to our systems faster than our simulations predicted possible. No, Venre replied, her scales showing the deep purple of revelation. This is what makes them truly dangerous. It's not just their bodies that adapt, it's their minds, their methods, their entire approach to existence. They don't just survive challenges, they absorb them, learn from them, use them to become better. The humans had somehow managed to create a manual control system for the reactor in less than 2 hours, using a combination of Ketheri technology and what they called good old-fashioned mechanical engineering. They were literally building new solutions on the fly, testing and adjusting their approaches in real time. You know what this reminds me of? Kuber asked as he taught a group of Ketheri engineers how to manually vent plasma conduits. The International Space Station crisis of 32. Same principle. When high-tech fails, go low-tech. Or that nuclear reactor incident in Taiwan. Chen added, her hands deep in alien circuitry. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. As the crisis point approached, Venra realized that their entire understanding of humanity had been wrong from the start. They weren't just physically adaptable, they were conceptually adaptable. Every problem was a puzzle to be solved, every failure a lesson to be learned, every crisis an opportunity to develop new capabilities. Chief, Tel Min said quietly, watching as the humans continued to transform their perfectly designed ship into something far more resilient. I don't think we're containing them at all. I think they're containing themselves. By choice. Venre's scales shifted to the midnight blue of deep contemplation. The most terrifying thing about humans wasn't their ability to survive against impossible odds. It was their ability to take those impossible situations and turn them into advantages, to transform potential extinction events into teaching moments. And as she watched them work, she realized that the galaxy wasn't just unprepared for humanity. It was unprepared for the changes humanity would inevitably bring to everything they touched. The Galactic Council's emergency session chamber had never been this quiet. Representatives from over 300 species sat in stunned silence as they reviewed the Ketheri research team's findings. Venra stood at the center, her scales a steady gray of absolute certainty as she delivered her final report. In conclusion, she stated, we recommend classifying humanity not just as a level 1 biological anomaly, but as the first documented adaptive apex species in known space. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices and neural broadcasts. A Myraxian representative, their crystalline form vibrating with concern, spoke first. This is unprecedented. No species has ever received such a classification. No species has ever warranted it, Venra replied. She gestured and holographic displays activated around the chamber, showing footage from the research station crisis. What you're seeing isn't just survival. It's evolutionary acceleration in real time. The displays showed humans teaching Ketheri crew members how to operate complex systems manually, creating new technical solutions mid-crisis, and adapting alien technology to purposes its designers had never imagined possible. But their pre-FTL, A Drax observer noted, their energy form flickering with confusion. Their technology is primitive by our standards. That's exactly what makes them so remarkable, Tellman interjected, stepping forward. They achieved spaceflight without neural interfaces. They built a planetary civilization without unified genetic engineering. Every limitation we would consider crippling, they turned into an advantage. New footage played, Chen explaining how human engineering principles could be applied to Ketheri systems, Cooper demonstrating survival techniques that worked across species boundaries, Reeves teaching adaptation methods that even the Ketheri's advanced biology could utilize. During the reactor crisis, Venra continued, they didn't just save the station. They improved it. Every system they touched became more resilient, more adaptable. They instinctively build redundancies, alternative methods, manual overrides, not because they're afraid of failure, but because they see failure as an opportunity to evolve. The council chamber's displays shifted to show biological data. Their adaptation isn't limited to technology. Their bodies can modify themselves in response to almost any environmental pressure. Their minds can process and integrate new information at rates that defy our models. But most importantly, they do this as a species-wide trait. Every human possesses this capability to some degree. Surely you're exaggerating, the Myraxian representative insisted. No species cold. They built civilizations in deserts, Arctic wastes, and ocean depths, Tellman interrupted. They survived ice ages with stone tools. They adapt to new gravities within days, new atmospheres within weeks. They can learn to survive in almost any environment we've discovered, and they do it without genetic engineering or technological assistance. Venray's scales shifted to the deep crimson of warning. But that's not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is that they don't see themselves as remarkable. To them, this constant adaptation, this endless drive to overcome and improve, is simply their natural state of being. She activated one final display, showing the human subjects in their final interview before departing the research station. They were casually discussing plans to implement some of their jury-rigged solutions in their own space program, already thinking about how to improve upon alien technology they'd only just encountered. The most crucial thing we learned, Venra concluded, is that everything we discovered about them came from just 3 individuals. 3 humans, chosen at random, demonstrated adaptation capabilities that our entire species couldn't match. And there are billions more of them, each with this same potential. The council chamber remained silent for a long moment before the High Administrator spoke. Your recommendation, Chief Researcher? We have 2 options, Venra replied. We can try to contain them, attempt to isolate their world, limit their expansion, control their development. But I must warn you, based on our research, such attempts would likely only accelerate their adaptation. They thrive on overcoming obstacles. And the second option, we accept them into the galactic community now, on our terms, while we can still help guide their development. Because make no mistake, they will join us eventually. The only question is whether they do so as potential allies who can teach us new ways to adapt and grow, or as a force that has learned to overcome every barrier we placed in their path. The council chamber erupted in debate, but Venra's scales had already settled into the deep blue of certainty. She'd seen humanity's true nature, had witnessed their ability to turn every challenge into an opportunity, every failure into a lesson, every limitation into a stepping stone to something new. In the end, the council would make whatever decision they thought best. But Venra knew the truth. Humanity wasn't just another species to be studied or classified. They were a force of nature, a biological engine of constant adaptation and improvement, and they were coming to change the galaxy, whether the galaxy was ready or not. In her final report, encrypted and sealed in the deepest archives of the Ketheri Science Division, Venra added one last note. The most dangerous thing about humans isn't their ability to adapt to any situation. It's their inability to accept that anything is impossible. and in proving the impossible possible, they change not just themselves, but everything around them. May the galaxy be ready for what they will become.